Look at this, boys. They sent us a librarian to teach us how to fight. The voice of Midshipman First Class Decker dripped with the easy arrogance of a man who had never been truly tested, his words echoing off the cold, granite walls of the academy barracks. The crowd of senior cadets laughed, a chorus of smug superiority that filled the cavernous hall. She stood before them, a lieutenant commander by the rank on her collar, but her slight frame and the unassuming way she held herself seemed to invite their derision. She carried no swagger. Her uniform was stark and unadorned, and her gaze was steady, observant, a placid lake reflecting the storm of their mockery, without a single ripple. She simply waited, her silence a profound and unsettling counterpoint to their noise. But across the courtyard, watching the scene unfold on a security monitor in his dimly lit office, the Academy's commandant, Admiral Hayes, leaned forward. He didn't see a librarian. He saw the practiced stillness of a predator, the economy of motion that spoke not of weakness, but of a terrifying efficiency he hadn't witnessed in years. He saw the way her hands rested, not in her pockets or on her hips, but in a state of relaxed readiness, a subtle detail that screamed a truth these arrogant children were too blind to comprehend. If you believe that true strength is measured not in words, but in actions, type competence below. The Admiral watched the woman on the screen, a ghost of a memory stirring in the back of his mind, a whisper of a classified file he had read a decade ago about a shadow operative who moved with that same unnerving calm. He zoomed the camera in, focusing on her face, her eyes. They were not angry. They were not intimidated. They were processing, calculating, assessing. The cadets, led by the boisterous Decker, saw only a target for their juvenile power play. They saw what they wanted to see. An outsider, a woman in a world they considered their own, someone whose quiet professionalism they mistook for timidity. The rain had begun to fall, a steady, chilling drizzle that mirrored the coldness of her reception. Decker, emboldened by his audience, took another step. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific dripping with sarcasm, "I think you have the wrong building. The book club meets across campus." The laughter grew louder, more cruel. She said nothing. Her lack of reaction was a void, and it began to unnerve them more than any retort could have. They expected a protest, an appeal to her rank, a flash of anger. They received only silence. It was a silence that held the weight of mountains, the patience of geological time. It was a silence that had been forged in places Decker couldn't imagine in his worst nightmares. The Admiral saw it for what it was, the absolute confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, especially not to a room full of boys playing at being men. He watched as Decker, feeling his control of the moment slip in the face of her stillness, decided to escalate. With a nod to his cronies, they stepped back, and the heavy oak door of the barracks swung shut with a deafening thud, the lock clicking into place with a sound of finality. They had locked her out, in the rain. The Admiral's hand tightened on his desk. This was more than a prank. It was a profound failure of character, a desecration of the very code they swore to uphold. But his eyes remained fixed on the woman outside, now standing alone as the drizzle turned into a downpour. Her posture hadn't changed. The rain fell in punishing sheets, a cold, relentless assault that plastered her simple uniform to her skin and streamed down her face in rivulets. From the warm, dry comfort of the barracks common room, Decker and his pack of senior cadets watched their handiwork, their faces pressed against the thick, leaded glass like children at a zoo. They saw her standing there, a solitary figure against the swirling gray mist, and they felt a surge of triumphant power. They had made their point. They had asserted the hierarchy. In their minds, they had defended the sanctity of their world from an unqualified intruder. They laughed and made jokes, their voices loud and confident, congratulating each other on their cleverness. To them, her stillness was the paralysis of defeat, the resignation of someone who knew they were beaten. They could not have been more wrong. Outside, in the heart of the deluge, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma was not feeling the cold. Or rather, she was acknowledging it as a data point, an environmental factor to be cataloged and disregarded. Her mind, a finely honed instrument of tactical analysis, was not occupied with the insult or the discomfort. It was engaged in a familiar, almost subconscious exercise. She scanned the building's facade, her eyes tracing the lines of the century-old stonework. She noted the position of the downspouts, the load-bearing capacity of the window ledges, the security camera placements, the subtle vulnerabilities in the door frame. She mapped 3 potential breach points in under 5 seconds, not out of any intent to use them, but because it was her nature. It was what she did. She was a weapon, and a weapon's purpose is to understand its environment in terms of angles, weaknesses, and opportunities. Her calm was not resignation. It was control. It was the absolute mastery over her own physical and emotional responses, a discipline forged in crucibles of fire and ice, in the suffocating darkness of submerged tunnels, and the thin, screaming air of high-altitude drops. The cadet's mockery was a gnat buzzing in the face of a hurricane. It was irrelevant. She felt the water pooling in her boots and mentally adjusted her internal timeline for the potential onset of immersion foot, calculating the hours of exposure versus the ambient temperature. In his office, Admiral Hayes watched her on the monitor, his jaw tight. He saw her head tilt ever so slightly, a minute shift that no one else would notice. She wasn't looking at the door anymore. She was looking up at the roofline, her gaze sharp and analytical. A chill ran down the Admiral's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. He recognized that look. It was the look of a wolf studying a sheep pen, not with hunger, but with a kind of professional, detached curiosity. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that the cadets had not locked a librarian out of their house. They had locked themselves in with a legend. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for the base master-at-arms. He could end this now, bring her inside, and rain wholly held down on Decker and his friends. But he hesitated. A deeper, more ancient instinct, the part of him that understood the brutal but effective nature of battlefield lessons, stayed his hand. This was a teachable moment of a magnitude that no classroom lecture could ever replicate. These cadets, who would one day lead sailors and Marines in a harm's way, needed to learn this lesson. They needed to understand that assumptions kill, and they needed to learn it in a way they would never, ever forget. He put the phone down and continued to watch, no longer an administrator, but a student of a masterclass in professional composure. The next morning, the air in the briefing room for Operation Triton's Point was thick with a humid, post-storm tension. The exercise was the capstone event for the senior class, a complex, multi-stage simulated hostage rescue aboard the USS Triton, a decommissioned destroyer permanently moored at the Academy's waterfront training facility. The cadets, clad in tactical gear, buzzed with nervous energy. Midshipman Decker stood at the front, projecting an aura of bombastic confidence as he briefed his team. He used a laser pointer to trace aggressive, unrealistic assault paths on a large digital map of the ship, his voice booming with jargon he had learned from books, not from experience. He was a caricature of a leader, all volume and no substance. At the back of the room, observing silently, stood Lieutenant Commander Sharma. She was in a fresh, dry uniform, her posture unchanged from the day before. Her presence was an unspoken accusation that hung in the air, but the cadets, following Decker's lead, ignored her, treating her as an irrelevant fixture. Admiral Hayes stood beside her, his face an unreadable mask of granite. The exercise began, and it was an immediate and catastrophic failure. Decker's team, fueled by his overconfident and poorly conceived plan, approached the Triton with all the subtlety of a marching band. They bunched up at the primary entry point, a heavy steel hatch on the main deck. They fumbled with their breaching tools, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Inside the ship, the hostage-takers, seasoned instructors from the Marine Corps' fast companies, listened to their chaotic approach and prepared a brutal welcome. The simulated explosion that ripped through Decker's team was a cacophony of instructor whistles and red smoke grenades. Within 90 seconds, the entire assault force was declared killed in action. A heavy, humiliated silence fell over the exercise. Over the comms, the chief instructor's voice crackled with contempt. Decker, your team is wiped. Your plan was garbage. Your execution was worse. Stand down and await debrief. The cadets stood amidst the dissipating red smoke, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Decker's face was a mottled canvas of fury and embarrassment. It was in that moment of absolute failure, in that deafening silence of incompetence, that Admiral Hayes took a single step forward. He didn't look at the cadets. He looked at Sharma. "Commander," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of total authority. "The exercise is now yours. Show them how it's done." Sharma gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't move towards the cadets. She didn't grab a whiteboard or a map. She simply raised a small, encrypted radio to her lips. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. Trident 1, this is Sea Witch. Execute. I say again, execute. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The cadets looked around, confused. Decker let out a short, derisive snort, ready to mock this new failure. And then, the world changed. There was no thunderous arrival, no dramatic helicopter rappel. There was only the sudden, unnerving appearance of presence where none had existed a moment before. From the dark, churning waters of the Severn River, 6 figures rose as one, emerging from the depths with the silent, fluid grace of predators. They were clad in matte black combat gear that shed water like the skin of a shark, their faces obscured by advanced rebreather systems and night vision goggles that gave them an alien, inhuman aspect. They moved with a terrifying unity, a single organism of lethal intent, their weapons held at a perfect low ready, covering every angle without a single wasted motion. They were ghosts made of water and shadow. On the pier, 2 more figures materialized from behind a stack of shipping containers, having moved into position with an invisibility that defied logic. This was Trident 1. This was Sharma's team. They were Navy SEALs from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the legendary Tier 1 unit known as DevGru. They were not cadets playing a game. They were the living embodiment of the art of violence, the quiet professionals whose very existence was a closely guarded secret. The cadets, including Decker, stood frozen, their mouths agape. They looked from the wraith-like figures, now scaling the hull of the Triton with magnetic grapples and carbon fiber ladders, to the small, unassuming woman who had summoned them with 2 words. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't issued a complex series of commands. She had simply lit the fuse. Sharma moved forward, her pace unhurried but purposeful. Her team flowed around her, their movements a masterclass in tactical choreography. They didn't need to speak. They communicated through subtle hand signals, through shifts in posture, through a shared consciousness forged in countless real-world operations. They reached the same hatch that had defeated Decker's team. One of the SEALs placed a small, specialized breaching charge, no bigger than a deck of cards, over the lock. The resulting pop was more like a cough than an explosion, and the heavy steel door swung inward as if by magic. Sharma was the first one through, her sidearm already up, sweeping her sector with an efficiency that was mesmerizing. Her team followed, a river of silent death pouring into the ship. The cadets, watching on helmet cams now projected onto the large screen in the briefing area, saw a completely different reality than the one they had experienced. They saw speed, precision, and an overwhelming, controlled violence of action. The Marine instructors, who had so easily dispatched the cadets, were now the ones being hunted. The SEALs moved through the narrow corridors of the Triton not like men, but like something elemental. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. A door would be breached, a room cleared, and 2 hostage takers, neutralized with perfectly placed non-lethal training rounds before they could even raise their weapons. The entire ship, a labyrinth of steel and shadows, was secured in under 4 minutes. The final image on the screen was from the bridge, where the primary hostage was being held. Sharma stood over 2 downed Fast Company instructors, her weapon holstered. She tapped her radio twice. Trident 1, Sea Witch. Objective secured. All targets neutralized. Hostage safe. Mission complete, the comms clicked off. And then there was silence. A profound, echoing silence that was filled with the cadets' dawning, horrified understanding. Decker stared at the screen, his face pale, his earlier arrogance completely sandblasted away, leaving only raw, unadulterated shock. He looked at the ghosts on the screen, and then back at the woman who commanded them with a whisper. He hadn't just insulted a visiting officer. He had mocked a god of war. The debriefing room was a tomb. The air was thick with the suffocating weight of humiliation and awe. The senior cadets sat in tiered rows, their expensive tactical gear now feeling like a cheap costume. They sat ramrod straight, their eyes fixed forward, not daring to meet the gaze of the man who stood before them. Admiral Hayes paced slowly on the dais, his hands clasped behind his back. He had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. His disappointment was a physical force in the room, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. Lieutenant Commander Sharma stood off to the side, as still and silent as a statue, her presence a constant, powerful reminder of the chasm between their swagger and her substance. The Admiral stopped pacing and turned to face the cadets. For 4 years, he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We have tried to teach you the principles of leadership. We have lectured you on honor, on courage, on commitment. We have tried to instill in you the single most important quality of a warrior, judgment. He let that word hang in the air. Yesterday, many of you failed that lesson. You substituted judgment for prejudice. You chose arrogance over respect. You looked at a decorated officer of the United States Navy and saw only what your own pathetic insecurities wanted you to see. He turned and looked directly at Decker, whose face had gone ashen. You, Midshipman Decker, led that charge. You decided that your 4 years in this institution gave you the right to pass judgment on an officer whose boots you were not worthy to shine. Hayes turned to his aide. Bring up her file. Main screen, the massive display behind him, which moments before had shown the tactical feed from the exercise, now flickered to life. It displayed a standard naval officer service record. At the top was her name, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma. And then the room fell into a deeper, more profound silence as the details began to scroll. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The name itself was a thunderclap. The cadets exchanged shocked, fearful glances. This wasn't just a SEAL. This was the elite of the elite, the tip of the spear, the stuff of legends and whispers. The screen continued. Combat deployments. 12. 12 tours in the world's most dangerous places. The number was incomprehensible. Most career SEALs were lucky to survive half that many. Awards. The list scrolled on and on. Bronze stars with V for valor. Purple hearts, 3 of them. A silver star. And then, at the very top of the list, an award that made several cadets gasp out loud. The Navy Cross. The second highest award for valor in the entire United States military. A short, heavily redacted citation appeared next to it, mentioning extraordinary heroism during a classified operation, where she had single-handedly held off an enemy assault, saving her entire team while severely wounded. The screen was a testament to a life lived at the ragged edge of human endeavor, a litany of courage and sacrifice that was almost impossible to comprehend. Qualifications: Master EOD Technician, Military Freefall Jump Master, Lead Breacher, Advanced Sniper/Observer. The list of skills was as long and as daunting as her list of awards. It was a portfolio of lethality, a resume written in gunpowder and blood. The final line on the screen was perhaps the most chilling. Mission classifications: Top Secret /SCI//SAP. It was a declaration that the true nature of her service was so secret that they, even as future officers, had no right to even know existed. The screen went blank. Admiral Hayes turned away from it and faced Sharma. He took 2 steps toward her, his movements crisp and formal. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In the dead silence of the room, he brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. The sound of his palm striking his brow cover was like a gunshot. "Commander," he said, his voice ringing with a respect so profound it was almost reverent. "On behalf of this academy, I apologize. There is no excuse for the disrespect you were shown." He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. For the first time, Sharma's expression changed. A flicker of something, not surprise, but a deep, quiet acknowledgement, passed through her eyes. She returned the salute with the same sharp precision. "No apology necessary, Admiral," she said, her voice calm and even. The lesson was the point. Hayes dropped his salute and turned back to the sea of stunned faces. His expression was now one of cold, righteous fury. "Do you understand now?" he roared, and this time his voice was a physical blow, making the cadets flinch in their seats. "Do you see what true competence looks like? It does not boast. It does not preen. It does not need to announce its presence in a room. It simply is. It is quiet. It is professional. It is deadly." You looked at this officer, a genuine hero of this nation, and you judged her by the cover. You mistook her humility for weakness. You mistook her silence for fear. "You have brought shame upon yourselves and upon this institution." He walked down from the dais and stood directly in front of Decker. The much larger midshipman seemed to shrink under the Admiral's gaze. "Midshipman Decker, you are the leader of your class. You set the tone, and the tone you set was one of ignorant, unearned arrogance. You have failed as a midshipman, and you have failed as a leader. You will be confined to quarters for the remainder of the semester. Your weekends are forfeit. You will spend them writing a 200-page essay on the history of the Navy Cross and the lives of the heroes who have earned it. Perhaps by studying true warriors, you might one day learn to emulate them. Is that understood? Decker could barely speak. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Yes, Admiral, he whispered, his voice cracking. The Admiral scanned the faces of the other cadets involved. The rest of you, your punishment will be less formal, but perhaps more meaningful. You will be personally responsible for cleaning every weapon, every piece of gear, and every inch of the USS Triton used in today's exercise. You will do it until it gleams. And as you scrub, you will reflect on the difference between the gear and the warrior who wields it. He returned to the front of the room, his message delivered. The public reckoning was complete. The arrogance that had filled the barracks the day before had been utterly and completely annihilated, replaced by a humbling, terrifying respect. The story did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the hallowed halls of the United States Naval Academy with the speed and force of a shockwave. The story of the quiet lieutenant commander who was locked out in the rain became an instant, indelible legend. The story of the ghosts who rose from the river and took a ship in under 4 minutes became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed, reverent tones. The story of Admiral Hayes's thunderous rebuke and Decker's public humiliation became a foundational piece of Academy folklore. It was told in the mess halls over meals, where the usual boisterous chatter was replaced by quiet, reflective conversation. It was discussed in the barracks late at night, a modern myth to chasten the arrogant and inspire the humble. It even seeped into the digital ether, discussed on encrypted forums and secure message boards frequented by veterans and active duty personnel, with a name C which was spoken of with a mixture of awe and professional admiration. The cadets who had participated in the prank became pariahs, but not in the way they expected. They were not hazed or openly mocked. Instead, they were treated with a kind of clinical disdain, their presence a reminder of a collective failure. They bore their punishment in silence, scrubbing the decks of the Triton with a fervor born of shame. Decker, confined to his room, was a changed man. The brittle shell of his arrogance had been shattered, and for the first time, he was forced to confront the vast emptiness it had concealed. He didn't just write his essay on the Navy Cross, he consumed it. He read every citation, every biography. He read about the heroes of Midway, of Incheon, of Fallujah. He read about men and women of impossible courage, most of whom were described by their peers not as the loudest or the strongest, but as the quietest, the most humble, the most professional. He was seeing a pattern, a truth about the nature of warriorhood that he had been blind to his entire life. A week later, his essay complete, he sought out Lieutenant Commander Sharma. He found her not in an office, but on the small arms range, quietly mentoring a group of struggling plebeians on the fundamentals of marksmanship. She was patient, her instructions concise and clear, her presence calming. Decker waited until she was finished. He approached her not with a swagger, but with a palpable, painful humility. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low, "there's no excuse for my actions. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I am sorry." He stood there, braced for a lecture, for a dismissal, for anything but what he received. Sharma finished wiping down a training pistol, her movements methodical and precise. She looked up at him, her gaze as steady and unreadable as ever. She gave a single, slow nod. "Focus on the lesson, midshipman," she said, and then she turned back to her work. The absolution was in its absence. The forgiveness was in the command to learn. It was a far more profound and lasting instruction than any punishment could ever be. For Decker, it was the beginning of a long road, not to redemption, but to genuine understanding. The ripples of that day continued to spread, changing the very culture of the institution in subtle but powerful ways. The name of the capstone exercise, Operation Triton's Point, was officially changed. It was now known simply as the Sea Witch Standard, a name that carried with it an impossibly high bar for tactical excellence and professional humility. The specific entry hatch on the USS Triton, where Sharma and her team had made their flawless breach, was marked with a small, unassuming brass plaque. It didn't bear her name. It simply read, "Assumptions are a liability. Competence is the only currency." The plaque became a mandatory stop on tours for new plebeians, a place where upperclassmen would tell the story, not as a joke, but as a core lesson in the Academy's values. The mythology of the quiet professional began to take root in a place that had too often celebrated the loudest voice. Instructors began to change their teaching methods, emphasizing substance over style, precision over volume. They started using Sharma as a case study in leadership, not just for her tactical brilliance, but for her profound, unshakable composure in the face of disrespect. The photo that Admiral Hayes had ordered taken that day, a single, high-resolution shot of Sharma, standing alone in the pouring rain, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed and analytical, was framed and hung in the main corridor of the Leadership and Ethics building. There was no nameplate, no explanation. There didn't need to be. Every cadet knew the story. The image became a symbol, a powerful and constant reminder that the measure of a warrior is not found in the shine of their buttons or the volume of their voice, but in the quiet steel of their character. Lieutenant Commander Sharma herself remained at the academy for another month, a guest instructor whose seminars were suddenly standing room only. She never once mentioned the incident with the cadets. She never spoke of her own accomplishments. Her lessons were brutally technical, focused on the unglamorous, painstaking work of mission planning, risk assessment, and operational security. She taught them that victory is not achieved in moments of glory, but in thousands of hours of quiet, disciplined preparation. She mentored with a philosophy of action. She would watch a cadet struggle with a complex task, allow them to fail, and then guide them through it with a few precise words, forcing them to find the solution themselves. She was building competence, not dependence. When her time at the academy was over, she left as quietly as she had arrived. There was no farewell ceremony, no grand speech. One day she was there, a silent, powerful presence in the halls. The next, she was gone, presumably back to the shadowed world from which she had come. But she had left a permanent mark, a legacy not of war stories, but of a fundamental truth that the institution had desperately needed to relearn. She had taught them that respect is not a right of rank. It is a debt owed to demonstrated competence. Years passed. The story of Sharma's storm, as it came to be known, solidified from recent memory into enduring legend, a piece of institutional scripture passed down from one class of midshipmen to the next. It became a tool, a moral compass used to orient new arrivals. Remember the sea which, upperclassmen would tell the nervous plebes. Your assumptions are your enemy. Your competence is your only friend. The lesson had taken hold, becoming a part of the Academy's DNA. On the bridge of the USS Arleigh Burke, a guided missile destroyer patrolling the turbulent waters of the South China Sea, a young lieutenant stood, watch as officer of the deck. His name was Decker. He was leaner now, the last vestiges of youthful arrogance burned away by the harsh realities of naval service. His command style was quiet, observant, and deeply respectful of the expertise of his crew, from the lowest-ranking seaman to his most senior chief. A tense situation was unfolding. A foreign warship was behaving erratically, its intentions unclear, pushing the boundaries of international law. The bridge was a hive of controlled tension. The captain, a stern, by-the-book traditionalist, was about to order an aggressive maneuver that Decker's gut told him was a dangerous escalation. Just then, a quiet voice spoke from the tactical plotting station. "Sir, I have a possible alternative. If we adjust our course by 3 degrees and use the literal current, we can maintain our standoff distance while positioning ourselves in a superior firing solution, de-escalating the immediate confrontation without surrendering tactical advantage." The voice belonged to a young, unassuming ensign, a woman fresh out of the academy who rarely spoke unless spoken to. The other officers on the bridge dismissed her suggestion out of hand. She was too junior, too inexperienced. But Decker turned and looked at her. He saw not her rank or her youth, but the calm confidence in her eyes and the irrefutable logic of her analysis. He saw a flash of another woman, standing in the rain, her silence speaking volumes. He remembered the lesson. He turned to the captain. "Captain, I recommend we consider the ensign's proposal. Her tactical assessment is sound." The captain was taken aback, but Decker's quiet conviction, a quality he had come to be known for, gave him pause. He considered it, and a moment later gave the order. The maneuver worked perfectly. The situation de-escalated. The crisis was averted not by aggression, but by quiet, intelligent competence. Later, Decker walked over to the young ensign station. "Good work, ensign," he said. That was sharp thinking. The ensign looked up, surprised by the direct praise. "Thank you, sir," Decker nodded, a faint, knowing smile on his face. He saw it then, the living legacy. It wasn't a plaque on a wall or a story told in a classroom. True legacy was in the actions of those who came after. It was in the quiet competence he now recognized and nurtured in others. It was the lesson of the sea which, still echoing across the fleet, a silent, powerful force for true strength and genuine leadership, a testament to the fact that the most powerful warriors are often the ones you never see coming. The universe of human endeavor is filled with noise. It is filled with the boasts of the arrogant, the proclamations of the self-important, and the empty promises of the untested. We are taught to equate volume with value, to mistake confidence for competence. We build hierarchies based on superficial markers, on appearance, on pedigree, on the swagger of a walk or the boom of a voice. But this is a grand and dangerous illusion. The true architects of our world, the true guardians of our safety, do not operate in the realm of noise. They live in the kingdom of silence. They are the quiet professionals, the men and women whose work is too important to be loud, whose accomplishments are too profound to be advertised. Their currency is not praise, but results. Their reward is not recognition, but the successful completion of the mission. They understand a fundamental truth that our society often forgets. The heaviest sword is always the one that is slowest to be drawn. The most dangerous person in the room is never the one who tells you they are. It is the one who sits in the corner, watching, listening, and thinking. Anya Sharma was a living embodiment of this principle. Her story is a parable for our times. She did not need to defend her honor with words, because her life's work was its own irrefutable defense. She did not need to demand respect, because her quiet competence commanded it on a level that fear or rank never could. The cadet's mistake was not merely a breach of military courtesy. It was a failure of perception, a blindness to the reality that true strength is an internal quality, not an external display. They learned that day that you do not judge a storm by the silence of its eye, but by the power it is capable of unleashing. The legacy she left behind was not a war story, but a fundamental shift in perspective. It was the understanding that humility is not weakness, but the armor of the truly strong. It was the knowledge that the ultimate measure of any leader, any warrior, any human being is not what they say they can do, but what they have already quietly done. This is the ethic of the quiet professional, a code that values action over words, substance over style, and mission over ego. It is a lesson we would all do well to remember in a world that grows louder and more superficial every day. Look for the quiet ones. Trust the calm ones. For it is in their silence that the real work is being done. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.